Thanks so much. Good evening and welcome to the Finance Committee's special meeting of Tuesday, October 5th, 2021. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Yes, ma'am. Chair Cormack.
Here.
Committee Member Burt.
Here.
Committee Member Filsa.
Here.
3 present.
Thank you. Now we'll turn to oral communications where members of the public may address us on any topic within the scope of the Finance Committee that is not on our agenda this evening. As a reminder, our agenda this evening includes discussion of the electric cost of service analysis and also modifications to parking permits. If you would like to address us, please go ahead and raise your digital hand in Zoom. I'm not seeing any interest in oral communications. Would the clerk please confirm that?
That is confirmed. I don't see any requests to speak.
All right, with that, we will move on to our first action item, which is the aforementioned electric cost of service analysis. And who will be presenting this evening?
Good evening, Chair Cormack, council members, Dean Batchelor, Director of Utilities. Utility staff tonight is and Utility Advisor Commission is recommending that the Finance Committee recommended the City Council approval of the design guidelines for the 2022 electric cost service and rate analysis. The primary goal for this cost of service is to review the allocation costs to customer classes and the electric rate designs to ensure customers are charged accordingly to the cost of service. Which is going to be included in this is going to be a rate design issue created for building electrification, electric EVs, penetration, EVs, microgrids, and then time of use rates for the future of hopefully the metering of the infrastructure of the AMI. So tonight I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Eric Hennessy, our rates manager, that will be walking through this presentation. So Eric.
Thank you, Dean. Hopefully everyone can hear me. So today I'll be bringing to you the, I will share the talking points. And hopefully you see them, the design guidelines for the 2022 electric utility cost of service study.
Yes, we can see them. They're taking up about half the screen. So for those of us larger, that would be appreciated.
I will see if I can do so, yes.
But if I'm not mistaken, these are also on packet page 10.
They are, yes. Let me see if I can increase the size a touch.
That's perfect. Thank you, Mr. Keniston.
Wonderful. So, good evening. And tonight we're bringing to you the design guidelines for our planned electric cost of service analysis, or Cosa, and rate design update. It's been about a little more than 5 years since we did our last cost of service study, and we're looking to possibly introduce some new or updated rate offerings. So we feel it's best to update the Cosa as well in this case. So when we do a Cosa, we try to give both you, the UAC, and council an opportunity to provide guidance and express areas of interest and study early on rather than later. That way, we can better guide our consultants on where to focus their attention, and this meeting is your chance to give us that policy guidance. So once the cost of service study is done, we try not to make changes. That can be frustrating for policymakers and us because sometimes the rates produced in the Cosa aren't exactly what you guys want them to be. So governing boards and other agencies have created some legal issues for themselves by trying to adopt rates that don't necessarily align with published cost of service study. So we try to minimize that potential frustration by getting your guidance early. And if we find areas where there's some flexibility in the Cosa, we can make sure that final product aligns with your policy guidance as much as possible. Now, because the number of items we want to look at and investigate, given our fiscal year time constraints, it's likely this project is going to be broken up over about 2 years. Our first and foremost goal, obviously, is to update the existing rates as they are and any rate design changes that are inseparable from that base Cosa. And then we'll follow along with Cosa amendments for new rate designs such as DC fast chargers, data center rates, all electric rates, microgrid, et cetera. Some of them we'll try to do earlier rather than later, but that's what we're coming to you for, trying to find out what topics you consider higher priority will help us drive decisions on what we look to prioritize earlier on. So to start, we've got the guidelines that are up here on the screen. First and foremost, rates must be based on the cost to provide service. It's a bedrock principle and our first guideline always. Costs and rates must be allocated based on the cost to serve their respective groups. And there are sometimes multiple ways that certain costs can be classified and allocated, and that in conjunction with policy recommendations can help guide the final COSA recommendation. But in all cases, we want to be as fair and legally defensible a document that we can produce. So within a cost-based rate structure, we keep an eye towards fairness and equity, especially with respect to low-income customers. We also want to avoid unnecessary rate design barriers to electrification, EV charging, solar, and storage, while simultaneously avoiding any subsidies between customer groups. And so we want to prepare for a transition to a time varying rather than tiered rates also. So the work plan for the COSA right now, we're looking at all electric household and or EV charging rates, separate DC fast charger rates, as well as from multi-vehicle charging areas, minimum charge versus fixed charge, rates for data center customers, rates for possible microgrid, updates to our existing standby charges, as well as TOU rates, both for existing large commercial customers, as well as pilot options for when we bring on AMI. Now I could go on and on, but because this is more of a forum for you to provide your input, I'm gonna stop and listen to what you have to say and any recommendations you may have. So with that, I open up to you.
Thank you, Mr. Keniston. We'll now go to members of the public who would like to address us on the 2022 electric cost of service and rates analysis. If you would like to address the Finance Committee, please raise your hand in Zoom. I don't see anyone on the phone, so, and Mr. Keniston, you can stop sharing your screen now. Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
So we don't need to give the phone instructions. Again, this is the opportunity for public comment on item 1. I'm not seeing any interest. Would the clerk please confirm that?
That is correct. I don't see any requests to speak.
All right, we'll close public comment, turn to my colleagues who would like to go first with questions and comments. You can raise your hand or you can just unmute. All right, Vice Mayor Burt, please begin.
So thanks for not just the brief summary, but the staff report that really mapped out all of this. First, with the advanced metering, the AMI, are we expecting an offset to the capital costs, at least in part from operating efficiency and reduced labor costs from manual metering, reading, and related costs?
So I believe so. I mean, there's going to be, we'll see some efficiencies from the AMI program. There'll also be some additional costs as well, because AMI meters do require batteries and replacements and inspection in that way. But there will be cost savings as well as some new additional costs that we will get on board. And
has staff estimated what those cost impacts will be? I recall when we first looked at smart meters back in 2013 or so, that was actually one of the central aspects of the consideration. So even though it's not central to tonight's discussion, if you don't have it here, I would certainly want to request that staff lay that out so that we can see the trade-off, even if it's not a full cost recovery, but what are those numbers like?
Jonathan Abenshine, Assistant Director Utilities. We've done a business case that we can share, we can forward to you. And yes, energy efficiency was a part of the value proposition there.
Oh, so energy efficiency as well as reduced operating costs.
As well as reduced operating costs.
Right. Good, thank you.
Mayor Burt, you'll be seeing that presentation on the 18th on
Great.
The AMI.
Okay, thanks. Let's see. The other thing that I kind of wanted to leap to is we're looking at, you laid out the kind of pros and cons of the tiered structure versus the the differing alternatives. And one of the things that we've been hearing about already is from residents who are doing electrification being forced into a higher tier, as you mentioned in your report. So I'm concerned about how we might be able to contend with that issue sooner than getting this entire study done and through the new rate structure through the council. One of the things, and then your report also mentioned that some of the future rate structures would actually be dependent on the AMI. So we'd have a question what we do in the next 5 years either way. And so one of the things I was struggling with was whether there is some mechanism where we might be able to provide a discount or against electricity use for residences, or maybe for that matter for commercial as well, that had gone and done electrification steps. So we could have a scoring system for an EV charger at home, for heat pump water, heat pump air, etc. Has there been any thought to how we could structure a tiered system to not penalize people for electrifying through something like that or some other means?
So providing discounts is a tricky proposition. The only way that you could do it would be to use non-rate related revenues to help that. But one of the things that we will be evaluating, I will say, in this study is evaluating both the size and scope of our existing tiers, potentially moving even towards a flat rate rather than having a tiered rate at all might be one option to roll forward with, and has actually been a transition scheme used in other utilities moving towards time of use as a halfway measure, get off of tiers, move to a flat base, and then move from there to an AMI program.
So you said that the only way we could do a discount would be through some other subsidy. I want to explore that a little bit more. I understand that in the report said that the under Prop 26 rates can't be structured solely to achieve policy objectives. But I think that we're looking at an interim measure until we got this new study accomplished, so that we basically don't retard our whole electrification program because people are being penalized for moving toward electrification right now. And we're hearing this from a lot of residents. I assume you're hearing the same thing. And then the question is whether there are reasonable arguments that this is not one class of customers subsidizing another. And I think that it's possible that we could make those arguments. I see Ms. Stump's here, and maybe she has an interest in waiting in a little bit. But I'm very interested in what we might be able to do as a bridge measure between now and when we get the whole new study and structure done.
Yeah, thanks. So I think the purpose of tonight and probably the scope of what's reasonable would not be to reach final answers and analysis, but to get council's, as Eric said, get council's priorities and interests and concerns, and then to go and work with the consultants and the legal team also to see kind of what can be done. So Dean and utility staff, is there some workflow that's possible where this Cosa group that we'll be working with can do some initial work on, potentially a bridging or an interim strategy? Is that something that you could work on with this consultant, or that staff could take a look at those issues?
We've looked at some. We've looked at some of these issues to some extent in the past, and I think what we could do is take that as a work item and potentially, I guess my question would be, what would be the best vehicle to communicate the results of that analysis? Would this be a work item that I think that probably the best would be for us to make this a work item that we take and act on if we can, rather than report back. But if the finance committee is looking for a report back, we could try to figure out how to do that as well.
Well, and of course, Finance Committee is coming out of tonight's item will make recommendation to council. So that idea could get rolled up into that recommendation so that council gets a chance to say, yes, we do want the staff to take a look at potential interim strategy. That makes sense, Dean?
It does. I think that makes a lot of sense. And we can look at it that way and then bring it back.
Great. That sounds good. Thank you. And one other question, you listed that the COSA would include a range of design issues created by increasing electrification, EVs, and microgrids. I wanted to also look at our cost structure based upon how storage might fit into this. And second, the issue of how, as we're looking, it's not really the rate structure, but making sure that the resiliency and reliability challenges that we have, and especially the need for increased reliability and resiliency as we electrify, that's built into our anticipated costs and then the rate structure as well. And that maybe even ties in a little more than I was thinking when you look at what you were suggesting on the certain of the flat fees that you're proposing, or at least proposing be considered. And as I think about it, that there may be a relationship between those two as well. And so any feedback on the ways in which storage, resiliency, and reliability, and now I think about storage is related to those others too, how those tie into this discussion?
We've already been doing some research on good pricing, how we could best price for storage coming into our system, and do it in such a way that we both don't impede it, as well as making sure that we do collect our required distribution costs both ways. So we've already got outline for a rate structure that we're looking at that way. We'd like to get mainly just get the consultant to vet that methodology and bake it into our updated cost. So that is something we're looking at.
Vice Mayor, you're on mute.
Sorry. Under your guidelines, if we could even have them back on the screen would be great. But guideline 3 and guideline 4 both talked about not creating unnecessary barriers, first to building and vehicle electrification, and then under 4 to barriers to on-site generation and storage. But certainly not creating unnecessary barriers is important, but can the guideline include actually to incentivize those things, which are very important policy objectives, and doing so within the constraints of Prop 26, but we're only talking here about not creating unnecessary barriers versus what we need to do to incentivize these changes to achieve the policy objectives.
I think the intent that we had in writing these were that our overall goal is that we don't want to, short the distribution system in what we're doing, but we'll incentivize as much as possible while also not penalizing. I guess that was the intent behind the guidelines, but maybe we can rewrite them a little clearer or nicer. So
I think we really want to stay away from the word incentives necessarily in these guidelines, but I think one thing we could conceivably talk about is making sure that all value provided by these technologies to the utility and to the ratepayers is reflected in the rate structures. I would defer to the attorney's office. Maybe.
Yeah, I like that a lot. So yeah, the staff is rightly concerned about using the word incentive because it has been attached to some poor outcomes for rate structures under Prop 26. But what John said, I think can work. This can be rewritten to be stronger. So not so much just avoiding a bad outcome, but to the, being mindful to include all of the value. And so that, we'll figure out what the words are, but we have to include the while remaining cost-based. And yeah, so something like that can work.
Okay, sounds like you'll tweak that. Good, that's good for me for right now. Thank you.
Councilmember Phil Seth.
Well, I actually didn't have a lot of questions. I thought it was a good list, and I think if we can do this, it's going to support what we need to do. And so I sort of stopped there.
Councilmember Phil Seth and I had the same word in mind. My thought was working backwards here, since you still have this up, is in lieu of should not create unnecessary barriers would be the word support, to the extent that could then be worked into the other phrasing that Mr. Abendschein was sharing. So. Okay, you can take that down. Thanks so much. So just looking at page 2 of the report, which is packet page 4, there's a statement about our flat to declining electric loads and that the influx of more electric appliances is offset by improvements in efficiency. Is that today? Is that do we think that for the next 5 years, 10 years? What's the time frame for that statement?
I think it's one that we've seen sort of continuing, that efficiency continues to eat into our load structure. There's always a sort of an ongoing element of that we bake into our projections going forward. Obviously, right now with COVID, we've seen dramatic load shifts just with businesses being closed and the change in how various customer groups are using. But I think we always keep in mind a certain amount of new efficiency measures coming into place. It's amazing. There's always new lighting efficiencies, always new boilers, always new equipment coming out, and people are taking advantage of it, which is good. So, but yeah.
Okay, so more current experience, but not necessarily a forecast of 10 years from now if we actually do flip the switch on all of these. Okay. I also thought, we talk about this not often enough. Now I'm on page 3, packet page 5, the fact that 25% of the sales are residential. We spend so much time talking about that. So, having these numbers with 25% residential and 75% commercial for electric is helpful. And when we discuss gas, I think we should have that as well, because those, I think, are numbers that would surprise people. And they certainly do affect how we're going to move forward in terms of the rates. We've already discussed AMI a little bit, time of use. We talked about the change in the phraseology. So one of the things I just want to make sure I understand, guideline 6, which it sounds like came from the UAC, fixed versus minimum. Fixed, let me just test my understanding and then you can tell me if I got it right or wrong. Fixed would be there's going to be a certain amount of cost for the system and we're going to allocate that across everybody. And if you don't use a single kilowatt, you're going to get that fixed. Or actually, you know what? Why don't you just tell me the difference between fixed and minimum? It'll be shorter that way.
Yeah, so a fixed charge is exactly what you see currently in the say in the water and gas utilities, where there's an amount per month that goes to cover certain costs that just do not vary with usage, such as billing, meter reading, et cetera, as well as a certain portion of operations and maintenance and capital replacement costs. Contrast that with a minimum charge, you it's very similar, but once you reach a certain level of usage, there's a certain amount of essentially fixed amount of kWh built into that minimum charge. And then once you go above it, that minimum charge goes away and you just are only charged on volumetric thereafter. So they achieve roughly similar ends. They are structured slightly different in how they're done. If you have minimum charge, I'd say on the overarching, your per unit charges come down a little bit versus with a fixed charge, your per kWh charges would come down a touch, where at the minimum charge, they wouldn't, because it bottoms out, you're still collecting some of those costs through the rest of your load profile, if that helps.
So would we expect to see any significant difference in usage or cost to an end customer by transitioning to fixed from minimum?
You might, I don't think you'd see a tremendous amount of shift or difference. Anytime right now we do not have minimum charges activated. So anytime that you would implement a fixed charge, yes, there'd be a bump, and usually it would impact smaller users more in that particular case. But it depends again on how it's structured and what the impact is of that.
Okay, and is it fair to say that this is sort of a best practice that the industry is evolving towards, and that's part of why the recommendation? Or
well, most utilities are these days are either moving towards or already have a fixed charge for their electric utilities. So,
Mr. Abenshine, I'm sorry I interrupted you.
Oh, it's okay. No, I'm sorry. I'll just say that includes PG&E among the folks that are moving towards fixed charges over time.
Okay. And then I just want to thank staff for the resource impact section. Always good to know that we had this in our budget and you don't need a budget amendment. Thanks for that, absorbing it within existing resources. Do either of my colleagues need a second go round?
I had a couple more things.
Go right ahead.
So one is a follow-up on the either fixed or minimum charges. I'm wary that approach will not go over well with our ratepayers, the majority of our ratepayers. So I really want to put some caution out there on putting too much of an emphasis on that. I saw that the UAC was interested in it, but I think that there are real political challenges to that. And whatever we do that undermines the support that we have from the electorate for the necessary changes that we have in rate structures to address our reliability and resiliency, to address our electrification and climate action movement, I'm really wary about doing things that are going to fan the flames and create blowback against more important things. And so that's a strong cautionary note on putting too much emphasis on that. And when this comes back, and if that becomes the recommendation and we get a big blowback in the community, and then the council goes against that, we still lose politically, even if we don't even adopt that. So I think we want to anticipate to some degree what would be acceptable to the community. We don't have crystal balls, but we want to be thinking real hard about that. And just another thing on the table one, actually, I think it's 80% of the share of sales is from residential. And that really surprised me. I had not appreciated that. And it goes to another point that we don't make to the public, which is that when we have a portion of the public who is concerned about general fund transfers from the electric utility. And when it's pointed out that 80% of the transfers to the general fund that the public is receiving service benefits from is coming actually from the business side, I think that puts a different angle on the whole general fund transfer. And I would suspect that very few members of the public understand this information, which I didn't appreciate before reading the staff report. So I think we want to bring that to the forefront when we talk about general fund transfers, and even when we talk about bring this report forward, that it has that other impact on a favorable impact on the community. And I think that's all I had.
Councilmember Philsess, anything else?
I think the vice mayor's point about the public understanding that the balance between residential and commercial electricity, that's an interesting point. And probably
I think that was the point I made in my remarks, that we need to highlight that for sure. All right, well, I'll open the floor for motions.
So the staff report is not clear that I could see on what the motion is to be. Is it to recommend the guidelines?
Yes.
Okay. And so we've given some input. So maybe we want to modify this to say approve the guidelines with anticipated modifications based on Finance Committee recommendations. Is that acceptable?
Sure. I'm happy to second that. We'll just go ahead perhaps and specify that design guidelines 3 and 4. Those were the two, I believe, that we had suggested terminology changes.
Yeah, and the rest of comments can be outside of the motion, I think.
All right, thank
All right.
you. Would you care to speak to that?
I think we've had a good discussion. It was very informative, a report. And well, I guess the other question on this motion is whether we should include a reference to pursuing the interim modifications to the tier structure to reduce or eliminate disincentives for electrification. Should that be part of the motion? I think it's really, it's actually a guide. Molly, did you have something?
Yeah, probably, because
Okay.
it's an in addition to the straightforward item of the Cosa guidelines.
Okay.
Right, so perhaps the motion then would start with approve would be item 1, and then item 2. How would you like to phrase that, Vice Mayor?
I think that's a good way to do it, yes. So item 2 would be, I'll let the clerk catch it. What we have here is item 1, and then we'll need an item 2 below, I think, right?
So you need a second, right?
I already seconded it.
Oh, did you already
Thanks.
second it?
So what we
We'll
have
get
here
it
is item
sorted
1.
out.
Yeah, so what we have here is item 1, and then I need to give you wording for item 2 to follow this. Great, so that's item 1. Okay, so item 2 would be to request that staff come forward. We're not talking about necessarily in this next referral meeting though, right? What would be the timing on being able to offer an interim approach? I'm assuming it's not in the same time frame as this going forward.
That would be correct.
I don't think it's going to be on the same timeline.
Yeah. Makes sense. So I just want to get it right in the motion that request staff come forward at a future date with an interim, a proposal or options.
Options, yeah, I was going to say options.
For an interim modification to residential or to tiers, not even necessarily residential, that would not disincentivize, or I guess in this case, maybe that's okay, not disincentivize. How'd you, not create unnecessary barriers to electrification. Does that capture it, well enough, staff? That seem right?
Yes.
Okay. And Allison, is that okay with you?
I suggest that we
Yeah, maybe get
make
rid
it a
of
little more flexible to, yeah. Councilmember, yeah,
Go ahead.
maybe to the extent feasible or review and propose. I don't think we're able tonight to fully commit to a change in the tier structure.
Yeah.
I think we have to look at
Okay.
we understand the interest, but I think we are.
Okay,
perhaps to study then, rather than to bring options
To-
forward.
well, yeah,
Yeah, study options for an interim modification to tiers.
okay.
I think,
So
That
request-
would-
no,
That would
it's not just the finance committee that's going to weigh in on this. The UAC is going to weigh in on it too, in terms of rate structures and so forth. So there's a lot of work ahead on this, and you know, we make sure that as long as we're careful that the Cosa guidelines don't interfere with it, and that work can get done.
So clerk, I think we would delete the come forward at a future date.
Well, we don't want staff to just study it. We want staff to study it and then bring it forward.
Study options.
To return.
Yeah. Return to UAC, Finance Committee and Council. Is that basically what we do, right?
I don't know that staff needs us to specify that.
Yeah, you could just say, request that staff return through appropriate bodies.
Yeah, well, this does same thing. So
Yeah.
those are the bodies. So we don't need to change it.
So
This is
Madam
getting
Clerk,
really, yeah, it's looking
Yeah.
a little,
we don't want to come forward in order to study. We want to study and then return
Right.
at an appropriate
Exactly.
date with options.
so let's move the return at a future date to the end and see if that will work grammatically. And we'll put an and after electrification before that clause. Perfect. Let's get rid of the to lot, which is the fourth word.
Yep.
So I guess the only part is this not incentivize or create unnecessary barriers is some of the concerns we hear are from people who've already electrified as opposed to people who are intending to. So could we use again the word support?
I like that. Yeah.
Okay,
instead
that
of
would support electrification.
Mhm.
Okay,
Vice
good.
Mayor Burt, yeah.
all the better.
Okay. And then we can get rid of that additional too. I guess I'm just deleting prepositions tonight. All right, that looks fine to me. Staff, any other improvements for item 2?
No, I just appreciate all the edits so far. It seems a lot clearer. We can work with this.
Okay. Anything else, Vice Mayor Burt, would you care to speak to this further?
Nope.
Nor shall I. Councilmember Filsa?
Nope, looks good.
All right, let's go ahead and vote. Vice Mayor Burt?
Yes.
I will vote yes, and Councilmember Filsa.
Yes.
All right, that passes 3-0. Thank you to our utilities department. Really appreciate the parallel work here as we work on the SCAP, and this looks like we're off to a great start. Thank you for that. All right, let's see what time it is.
Thank you.
All right, I think, does staff have an estimate of how long the presentation, for example, on parking will be?
Give me
There-
one
I
second.
saw- yeah.
I'm looking at the number of slides. Probably 20 minutes, Philip?
Okay, so you know what? I'm just going to suggest we just take a 5-minute break. Everybody can sort of walk around, stretch before we get into our numbers. So we'll come back at 6:45 for item 2. Thanks. We'll just give Councilmember Phil Seth a moment and then we can get started with item 2. Ah,
I am here.
speak of the council member. All right, now we're proceeding on to item 2, which is modifications of many parking policies. I will not read the title of the action item because it's quite long. Mr. Kami, will you be beginning the presentation this evening?
Yes, thank you.
Welcome.
So good evening all. I'm Philip Kami, Chief Transportation Official, and tonight the Office of Transportation is here before you to discuss, as Councilmember Cormack put it, many modifications to Palo Alto's parking programs. But before we dive into this, I want to note that we'll need to use our new technology and data to thoroughly evaluate our parking programs, because we believe that parking demand will change significantly following the pandemic and entering into return to work, or perhaps our new norm. So this is going to require flexibility and ongoing review and modifications. So with that in hand, as a bit of an intro, I'll hand it off to Nathan Baird, our the city's parking and shuttles manager.
Good evening, council members. Yeah, as everyone's kind of summarizing, we have a number of recommendations before you this evening, but I really kind of think we can summarize them into 4 kind of separate recommendations for the sake of discussion. And we're really seeking your approval and advancement on all 4 of the items. The recommended items implement parking work plan items intent upon improving both program operations and effectiveness. Previous discrete actions that had advanced our parking working plan items included adopting automated license plate recognition technology back in February 2021, and yesterday's approval to transition to virtual permitting. Tonight, the Finance Committee is reviewing incremental program level changes to the city's parking programs, including pricing and the allocation of employee permits, as well as options for a CalAV Inlue program. Jonathan Late has provided an app places memo that we'll refer to, and also a recommendation to expand downtown garage and lot availability for any business located in the downtown RPP. We framed this as basically expanding the area of eligibility to any business that is within the downtown RPP, so that our garages and lots can serve more folks. As we begin to move forward with virtual permitting in 2022, this evening's 4 recommendations seek to address specific known parking issues and also bridge us to many of the work plan items virtual permitting will enable us to accomplish in the near future. How and whether to intensify California Avenue business uses is a key question. Whether to approve the proposed permit pricing and employee allocations that have been recommended to decrease the impact of business activity on the local residential parking availability. And finally, to expand eligibility of employee use of garages and lots to include any businesses that operate within the downtown RPP. In subsequent slides, we have summaries of all changes suggested in charts. We also have a map of our downtown RPP map boundaries. And we'll also include a brief summary of the options available for an Inlue program as outlined in the App Places memo you've received. Sorry, I'm skipping too far ahead. With council's approval of transitioning to virtual permits approved yesterday, we expect to begin transitioning to automated license plate recognition and virtual permitting in 22 and 23. As we start collecting in additional data, we'll be making additional recommendations about the pricing. Virtual permitting in particular gives us a number of different options and approaches, and we want to transition first to virtual permitting, having a continued conversation with the public and our stakeholders about the options available to us as we move forward, and then make subsequent changes that really take advantage of virtual permitting to advance many of the previous work plan items that have been prioritized. The next 2 slides, this slide kind of a little representation of the modeling work that we did to just show that we have capacity in both the garage garage and lots in both Cal Ave and University Avenue. Admittedly, these are pre-pandemic occupancy rates. We'll note that these rates are at the peak times that we've had parking shortages in the city, but even at those times, there's been availability in garages and lots. And so with the additional capacity that the garage at Cal Ave gives us, plus the wayfinding guidance programs, systems that we're adopting, as well as some of the commercial pricing work that we continue to make progress on and to put forward a commercial pilot in the future. All of those kind of changes that are ongoing really help us to manage the demand in a new way and also to accommodate what the demand is currently. But again, we'll really want to monitor our sales and our parking occupancy data over the next 12 to 24 months to make additional changes.
Mr. Booth, I'm so sorry to interrupt. I just want to make sure that the public has access to this. Has you or the clerk already put the slides up? There's a lot of data and information there. I just want to be sure that.
I do not know if this is up yet, but we can certainly publish this information. And
Okay, that would be great. Thank you.
Part of our parking action plan work is to make sure that this is available on our parking websites as well.
Okay,
So
thanks.
do
Apologies
digital-
for the interruption.
Yeah, no problem. We'll definitely want to summarize these. Yes, Leslie?
Through the chair, I just wanted to mention it is linked to our public agenda right now.
Thank you so much, Clerk Milton. I appreciate that. Great.
Okay. So we can come back to these charts later if needed, but we really have done the background work to show that we can accommodate the demand now. And with many of the changes that we're promoting and advancing, we believe we'll be able to accommodate and manage the demand in the future. Stakeholder engagement has really been kind of a, how do I say this? The Office of Transportation stakeholder engagement efforts have been really intent upon balancing input from a number of distinct parking user groups, including both our residential customers, businesses, employees, and visitors. So we had a survey that we put out in the March, spring and summer. We've had direct meetings with both businesses, groups of businesses. I've had an ongoing series of residential meetings with our residential stakeholder leadership group. And we also just have myself and Mark Kerr have nearly daily contact with our customers and ASD as well in terms of serving the garages and lots. So there's just a lot of stakeholder input engagement on these various issues. We've really been trying to balance kind of the policy directions we've been previously given with the stakeholder input and concerns about how the types of changes that we're proposing will impact various folks. So this chart kind of summarizes the key first two recommendations in terms of the pricing adjustments that we're making and also the employee allocation adjustments that we're making. We've tried to show that we're trying to use pricing to help incentivize the use of the garages and lots for long-time employee use over the residential areas. And we've also kind of shown where we're decreasing the availability of employee permit parking in the neighborhoods in favor of the garages and lots with the allocation adjustments that we've made. The other thing that we're doing with the pricing is bridging us to future virtual permitting capabilities for transitioning to monthly types of payments. And so, one of our work plan items is to make available to employees, the option to sign up for, just 2 months or 3 months instead of 6 months or a year. And we certainly have that capability with the new systems that are coming online. But the pricing as we've set it out today kind of gets us to an annual rate that we can then subsidize later into a monthly rates and still accomplish all of the pricing incentives that we want to make in terms of incentivizing the garages and lots over the residential areas. And then all of these numbers have been vetted and investigated by our finance folks, both on our team and in ASD's team, to make sure that we're not putting forward anything that is not financially sustainable. On this next slide kind of does two different things. On the left is we kind of redid that one table to just kind of show a little bit more clearly in the Cal Avenue area where that additional capacity is coming from. And I'll also just add that we have this additional capacity. The APGS systems that we're implementing both in Cal Ave garage and then in the downtown garages that will receive it beginning next year helps us add additional capacity. We also have a contract for valet services, and so we will deploy our valet services should any of the garages need even more additional capacity. You folks may have heard that the Calper garage this morning had a fire and is closed while folks are looking at that. We're going to be contacting as soon as tomorrow. Anybody has those permits will be available in a separate garage. The lot S will be available to them, garage S will be available to them. But again, we think we have that capacity right now, and we'll be monitoring how that works out. So, that ability to shift folks over this morning is just kind of example of how much additional capacity we currently have right now in both downtown and Cal Ave. And then on the right in the green box, this is kind of a really quick, short slide presentation of the App Places memo that you received and some of the key options or approaches for potentially doing an Inlue program in California to help some of those storefronts get filled up again. And we can go into that a little bit more deeper when the members are ready to discuss the Inlue program. The next slide, this is just to kind of show our downtown residential RPP program map. And so the idea would be that, this is the area, the larger downtown area that is served by downtown RPP. We really think it makes sense to allow any employee that needs to come into this area to make use of the garages and lots. In the near future, we also have a microtransit shuttle coming online, and we believe that will also potentially be useful to folks who, would like to park in the garages and lots and then, get to their destination or their place of employment that might be a little bit further afield. So again, this is a way to help us incentivize and make use of the garages and lots for employee parking in the downtown. All right, so in terms of next steps, we're going to bring, we're hoping that your input and actions will kind of help narrow down the course of the options available to us for moving forward with the Inlue program. And then we'll be able to bring that kind of focused option to PTC to kind of develop it a little bit further and put forward some of the other parameters that will need to be joined up with the overall approach that we hope that you'll approve this evening. And then we'll bring it back on November 1st for council's adoption. We're seeking adoption on November 1st because that just helps us begin with our virtual permitting efforts as soon as possible in 2022. And then, we're going to be continuing to work with PTC and stakeholders, especially regarding commercial pricing options that we need to develop over time. And so we got a little bit more legwork to kind of scope out those options and bring them back to council at a later date. So in summary, we're seeking approval for staff recommendations to move forward the development of a Inlue program. We're looking to approval to reduce the number of employee permits made available in the downtown and Evergreen Park Mayfield RPPs, and to increase the number of employee permits made available in the garages and lots, make the recommended pricing changes to incentivize garage and lot use over the residential areas, and also adjust the downtown commercial district boundaries so that more businesses are able to make use of the garages and lots there. We're also ready to entertain any other direction council members are interested in. That concludes the staff presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Baird. Now we'll turn to members of the public who might want to address us on this topic. If you'd like to address us on this parking topic, please raise your hand in Zoom. And each person will be allowed 3 minutes. We'll begin with Nielsen Buchanan. Mr. Buchanan, you may go ahead.
Thank you. I'd like to make a few comments covering a little bit of history and some current concerns, and I'd like to finish with say some nice things about the Office of Transportation. Just a little bit of brief history. When we kicked off the downtown RPP, there was an egregious element to that trial experiment, something that residents thought was totally unnecessary. And I think history proved that we were right. But to get the RPP started, we residents conceded the fact that the city manager could issue up to 2,000 non-resident permits. And that was simply a hedge in order to get the RPP through politically. There was no rational reason that the limit for non-resident permits to park in the neighborhoods should have been set at 2,000. But nevertheless, we all agreed to that. We had a shaky process of continuous improvement, but that's just the way it's been. Let me just talk for a moment about where we are today. Much of what's been presented makes pretty good sense to me, and I've spent a lot of time taking a look at it. I have one concern, and it relates really to the history of the 2,000 permit limit that was granted to the city manager. I am not clear on how many permits the Office of Transportation city manager will be authorized to sell in the downtown neighborhoods. That number will come back to the Planning Commission and to the council, as I understand it. If indeed there's lots of excess parking in the commercial core, then the intrusion of non-resident permits should be much more minimal. I just don't have a grasp of that. I also don't have a good grasp of the chart that was just presented of the total inventory of public parking inside the public and the commercial core. That's a tricky number because the inventory of public parking is a constant change of debits and credits to parklets, loading zones, street closures, and the like. It's really important that everyone understands the available inventory as we get through this COVID exercise. Last but not least, I would like to say that working with the new Office of Transportation has been a wonderful breath of fresh air to see competent engineering and sincere to try to find the balance between the commercial parking and the neighborhood parking. It's something in process. As we run through the gauntlet of the Finance Committee and the Planning Commission and back to the council, it'll have a chance to talk about this more. So thank you.
Thank you. And our next speaker will be Carol Scott. Ms. Scott, you have 3 minutes.
Good evening, everyone. I'd first like to say that I am very pleased to be able to support this proposal. It is, in fact, a wonderful pleasure to finally see a concrete proposal to bring the Evergreen Park and Mayfield RPP into alignment with the overall comprehensive plan for the city and with program statements. The comprehensive plan says that we will promote business, but not at the expense of residential quality of life. And there is a corollary program statement that says that there would be continuous progress towards reducing the intrusion of business into neighborhoods, recognizing that those steps would take time. And it is indeed time now with the new garage in the California Avenue area. There is one aspect of it that I would like for you to consider, however, which is the pricing in Zone G. Zone G will allow 40 permits to be sold to the businesses primarily along El Camino Real. As the proposal states, those permits will be sold at a premium price. In fact, a higher price than the commercial garages and lots. Since most of the businesses along El Camino Real are local retailers, such as the bike shop, restaurants, copy shops, and so on, there are some high-tech firms there, but it's primarily still a retail neighborhood. I'd like to suggest that those businesses should not be asked to pay a higher price than the high-tech workers who are parking in the garages in the California Avenue area. The businesses along El Camino Real traditionally have not been allowed to purchase permits on those garages and lots, and in fact, they're not very convenient to their operations. So that's the one small tweak that I'd like to protect the dentists, the bike shops, the retailers, the restaurants, and those people in Zone G, and that they be priced at the same price as the publicly owned garages and lots. Other than that, I'd like to really thank the Office of Transportation Parking people in particular for working this out and working with the residents to achieve this end. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Scott. And I believe that concludes our public comment. Seeing no additional hands, I will return to my colleagues. And Councilmember Filseth has got his hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you very much to the staff. I thought the whole thing was very clear and generally made a great deal of sense. And I was pleased that there's enough parking capacity, especially in the Cal Ave area, for everybody at this point. And I hope I hope that circumstance maintains. It's, as Nielsen talked a little bit on a couple of minutes ago, and, watching this in the downtown area, we definitely saw the number of permit sales fall over the several years that we've been doing this. And I don't know what the cause and effect is, but it certainly correlates to us continuing to raise the permit price. And so it's, hopefully given the capacity we've got and between the capacity we've got and sort of the new post-pandemic world and our ability to modulate pricing, looking at this, looks like we stand a striking chance of actually managing this thing. So that's really good. So thank you guys very much.
Thank you very much. I do want to reiterate, though, that I think we're creating a new baseline. So I hate to say that our demand models are correct, because I think they are correct in a world that we don't live in currently. But.
Okay, yeah, I guess we'll find out. I did have a couple of questions. So first of all, we didn't really talk about the Inlue idea, or the Inlue fee idea. Let me ask a question on that. What's the current status quo if somebody wants to convert a running store on Cal Ave to a restaurant and they need more parking? What do we make them do at the moment?
Thanks. I see perfectly timed Director Jonathan Late coming on to help us answer that question. And thank you, Director Late.
And you need to
You're
unmute Director Late.
Unmute Director Late.
I almost got through the day without that happening. All right. Well, so your question is if somebody comes in today and wants to convert to a restaurant.
Right.
Yeah.
And they need more parking. The parking standards are higher.
Yeah, they're out of luck.
Okay, so the answer is no.
Doesn't happen, right?
Okay. Under the proposal we've got, if we were to do an Inlue fee and they converted from a restaurant back to a shoe store, do they get a rebate?
Well, so a lot of details to be sorted out, but conceptually, the idea is that you would participate. Maybe you would subscribe for a year, and after that year, if you don't need it anymore, then you can pull out, and that would free up some spaces, right, for another conversion.
Okay. And then the other questions I had related to the pricing of low-income permits. right? Which is a substantial hike over what they are now, as proposed. How did you guys decide those were the right levels to set those at?
So one of the original MRG parking recommendations is to relook at that specifically, and it suggested a $12 to $15 per month fee as being potentially more useful to some of our low-income workers than a yearly fee. So,
oh, I see. So, oh, sorry, go ahead.
So what we've done is that we've kind of thought about that a little bit, you know, and if we added in now to the municipal fee schedule on a yearly basis, at a later date, once we have virtual permitting up and running and we can transition to the monthly rate, then we're pretty close to that previous recommendation of a $12 to $15 amount for the low income. And that happens to be about 75% off from what the full price is right now. And so what we're now proposing, instead of just $50 a year, we want to get to 75% of what the full price is. And eventually that full price will be, or full price or the reduced price will be available on a monthly basis. So that's kind of how we thought about that.
So you're sort of looking at those numbers as really it's an annualization of a monthly target.
Yes, and we want to get to a monthly target. We know that monthly is potentially just a better renewal rate for folks. You know, sometimes someone will come in and work just for a few months as a dishwasher or some other type of position in the downtown or Cal Ave. And so being able to opt into length of stay instead of just buying a yearly permit that they might not even need or find useful helps us kind of get the cost recovery where it needs to be, but also make something relevant that's significantly cheaper than the full price.
And just to add on to that, I'm sorry, just really briefly, I just want to note that this also ties to the theme that parking in Palo Alto generally is severely underpriced compared to our peers, compared to, quite frankly, transit. You know, where if transit is significantly more expensive than parking, which it currently is, then people are going to opt to drive, and that's, you know, generates traffic, generates trips. So that is a factor that, you know, should be in consideration with parking fees.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, agree 100% on that. It's sort of always looked at this and said, you know, there's upside. There's up room in this that would make a lot of sense to for all kinds of reasons to sort of into. Let me ask a related question to that though, just contextual. In the downtown RPPPs, what percent of permits that we sell are low income versus full fare?
I believe
half.
I think it's like 30 to around 30% at least of our downtown RPP permits have been historically the reduced price.
Okay, so
you usually go with 33%.
Right, but of course, we don't do a reduced price in the garages, right? And so
that's one of the things that we're hoping to correct this evening, and then have you approve early November. If we have this approved early November by the full council, then we can make that discount available potentially for the January cycles. And that's a really key part of helping transition some of our employees into the garages and lots.
Right. No, I think you know, that's there's some stuff here that I don't know if reform is the right word to use or not, but there's some moves here we need to make, and that's clearly one of them that we've been looking forward to for a long time. So that's awesome. I actually had only one more, which is in table 7. I assume, but just let me make sure I'm wrong. In table 7 on the implementation schedule, I assume if we're going to start with the new pricing on January 1st, 22, then sales ought to begin December of 21, not 22. Am I reading it right? Okay. All right, cool. Thank you guys very much.
If not, we're gonna need to have time travel in order to be able to purchase them. Okay, Vice Mayor Byrd.
You and I are going to be standing on the corner selling them, I think is what's going to happen.
I did that with a library. I think I've stood on enough corners.
Okay, so first, thanks for staff taking a crack at looking at this comprehensively, not only the transportation department parking related issues, but also the prospective zoning changes. One of the things that I didn't see in the quantification of available parking is the impact of street closures and parklets. And I think that does need to be part of the calculation as we look at it. I suspect we're still in a situation where for the near future, at least, we have surplus parking, but we're going to be not always in this current situation. I'll also just note that the staff reported that we've had in the past about a 60% show rate, and that's the average utilization of a parking permit that someone has. But with hybrid work, there's a very good chance that that show rate will be lower, and so we'd be needing to sell more permits to make sure that that the garages were being fully occupied to the extent there was demand. And so I think we need to build that expectation in there, even if we don't have clarity yet on what that show rate will be. And frankly, in the past, we've adjusted to get this essentially lower show rate. We kept selling permits and claiming that we were filling garages a good number of years ago, and residents like Nielsen Buchanan would count the empty spaces and say we're overflowing into the neighborhood, and the garage still has a lot of space, and it was because of the show rate. And it goes into that it really needs to be a pretty dynamic approach, and this is setting a certain amount of sales, but I think we have to build into this a latitude for staff to sell more permits on a very fluid basis. The other thing that I kind of want to touch on is the other dimensions and benefits really of the RPP program. Philip kind of alluded to how our parking is still considerably lower cost than many surrounding communities. And this goes back to the famous book of The High Cost of Free Parking, which was actually addressed and brought forward, and the community became more familiar with it when we adopted the RPP program. But that, at the time we adopted the program, the principal focus was to improve the quality of life in the neighborhood so that they could park in front of or at least near their own homes. But there were other very important benefits to that, and I don't see them in the report. That by restricting the free parking in the neighborhoods, we then coupled that with the creation of the TMA. And it was intended that we would have the business community participate and ultimately fund the TMA to reduce parking demand, and also reduce trip generation and traffic demand, and also reduce greenhouse gases. So we had those three other very important policy benefits to the creation of the RPP by restricting free parking in the neighborhoods. I'd really like to see that come back to the forefront. And that goes back into that we really aren't coupling this parking plan to the TMA at this time. And granted, we're in an era right now where the TMA is somewhat in hibernation. It's really not in a present need, but as we go to these next transformations, it's really going to come back to the forefront. So I think we've got to bring that back in there and to remind everybody those benefits of the TMA. And ultimately, the intention was to get the property owners and the businesses in those districts to bear responsibility for the impacts that they created. And indirectly, the RPP enabled that. Now, we never got the business community to take on the funding of the TMA, which was the original anticipation. And that might be able to be done going forward through an assessment district or through the business tax. But I think we need to have the integration of those principles and the benefits of that, how it all knits together. I think that needs to be part of what we present to the council and the community as a whole. And then I wanted to switch for a moment to California Avenue and the Inlue fee issue. So when we built the CalAv garage, we did it with city funding and not an assessment district. When we did the last two garages downtown, they were an assessment district. The property owners paid for those garages. In CalAv, we had completely city general funds or to our capital fund to pay for that garage and the expansion of that. So we had businesses down there and a growing number of what had been health service businesses and things. Those same spaces had been getting transformed into a lot of tech offices. I witnessed this over a 9-year period that I rented an office on the 200 block at CalAv. And I can tell you, for example, next door, there was a 120 square foot architect, single person office. She was there typically less than half the time. And instead it got converted and leased to a startup, and they had 6 people in 120 square feet, very literally. And then a few doors away, we had a new building at 250 CalAv. There were issues about whether that was really, it was parked according to the formula there, but you could see from you went to the upper deck of the Calper Webster garage there and looked in. It was just rows of workers at laptops a couple feet apart. And literally my landlord, who was deriving the benefit of packing more tech workers in his space, was criticizing that project was underparked after he had paid into the garage in the assessment district. So both of them were benefiting tremendously. When we built that garage, and we're saying that at $112,000 per space, we basically gifted that parking to those property owners and businesses. And we charge now, we've been charging $400 a year for renting a $112,000 value parking space. Now we're talking about raising that to $650. But then if we're going to have a retailer who's trying to expand, and they're needing to buy into an Inlue space, that same business on that district, we're saying, no, you have to pay $112,000. Whereas the tech company, who's not paying sales tax, only has to pay $650 a year for basically a trip or a parking demand that their business generated. So on the one hand, a tech worker's got an office employee. The restaurant, it might be one of their workers, or it might be a customer. But nevertheless, we're saying
I think we lost that.
Yeah. Let's see if it still shows up on the
quoting the comp plan
Okay.
programs and
Vice Mayor, we lost you.
was a way to.
We lost you partway through there. I think it was shortly after the phrase about a restaurant worker.
Okay, sorry about that. I'm not exactly sure where I was lost, but I was referring to on the last page, you brought up the comp plan policies and T512 that talks about reducing parking requirements for retail and restaurants as a way to encourage new businesses and the use of alternative modes, which was a little worded oddly because I don't think the reduced parking requirements facilitates the use of alternative modes, but I think both things are objectives. Nevertheless, we now in this transformation of our downtowns, we're trying to save our downtowns, but we are proposing here a structure that incentivizes or really subsidizes the office workers and charges full rate for the retailers, like a restaurant who is paying sales tax and who is contributing to the vitality that we're desperately trying to retain. And so I'm wondering, why wouldn't we if we're looking at that equity, if anything, the argument might be that the retailer or the food establishment is adding sales tax revenue and adding to the vitality that we're looking for. So if anything, I'd favor them, just like the comp plan seems to. But even if we treated them equally, why wouldn't we want to allow the restaurant to, rather than purchase a space, be able to purchase essentially for pay an amount that is equivalent to a parking permit. And even if you upped it to say, well, we want to assume they've got 100% show rate. Well, then you prorate that and charge them even more for it. But that's still so much less. And I can tell you that I'm really worried that at this 112,000, we're going to have almost no impact on the ability of those restaurants to expand. And yet we will have created a system over several years where we subsidize the office workers and penalized the very businesses that we're trying to help. Director Late, did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think we agree with you. And I think part of, and maybe I'm misunderstanding as a connection maybe to some of the other parking policies that we're talking about, but the Inlue, that was one of our concerns. And again, the 112, in case people aren't following that, that's the current cost for a space in the downtown University Avenue Inlue parking program, or actually I think it's closer to 116 now, I think, but 116,000. And so I think what we're noting is that that's not attainable for a retailer or a restaurant operator. And so the concept is so I think we presented in the App Places memo, not sure if you had a chance to look at it, it was late and apologize for that. There were three concepts. One was an in-lieu parking program like downtown. And we said that we didn't really support that for the reasons that you just articulated. And another option was to just change so that you have a blended rate. We didn't like that either because other, sort of downstream problems. And so this in-lieu subscription system is the third piece in that App Places memo that we conceptually are interested in, and we presented only as a concept to gauge your interest too, knowing that we're just sort of beginning to feel our way around this area. But it takes that very notion of a low fee assessed annually or over some kind of period of time to allow that is within reach of somebody who's trying to start up a business. And the restaurant, as you know, the margins are really thin there, so we couldn't expect that they would pay 100 any six figure. I don't think they could cover more than a couple thousand, and I'm just picking that number out of the air. But your reference to 650 for some of the other permits, I think speaks to the magnitude of what we're thinking about at a staff level.
Well, I'm very glad to hear that. I didn't see the Add Places memo. I don't know when it went out, and if they're late, it's maybe we need to have a way to call attention to that. We just sent you something. Maybe the others did see it, and it was just my fault. In the staff report, the reason I framed it the way I did was because the last paragraph on page 5, it says the cost per space would be calculated based on the current rate of the in-lieu parking space established for the downtown in-lieu program of $112,000 a space. Could be paid up front or spread out over in annual installments. But the annual installments, and according to the staff report, still indicated they would be based on that $112,000. So I'm glad to hear you're thinking otherwise. I would, the more as I struggled with this when I was reading the staff report, I got back thinking, well, wait a minute, we're raising even at a higher rate of $650 for an office worker. Why don't we have something comparable to that for however many spaces we think are in order for the restaurant? And so I'm interested in my colleagues' thoughts on that and staff's thoughts on that, whether that should be the basis for what we're looking at.
I'll just note that there's a lot that needs to be looked at in this kind of a program, and including where you set the fee and how do we do that in a way that complies with, I think it's Prop 26 or I forget the prop number, but so a lot to figure out. I think the reference to 112 was just like a starting place, and how do you roll that out over X number
It was a
of
starting
years?
place that worried me a lot.
Yeah, no, understood, but not, and I apologize that wasn't clear. It was never our intent to have such a big price for the types of uses that we're trying to encourage in this area. So yeah, point well taken. I think we're in agreement and would welcome the Finance Committee members to offer any additional perspective on that.
Great. And I may have some later questions, but I'll go ahead and pass the floor.
All right, thanks, staff. This certainly been a long time coming, and I know I was part of the group who, when you brought forth the California Avenue garage, said, hold on, I'm not sure we're there yet. So I appreciate you taking so much time to think through this in a holistic manner, in a way that is, connected, even aligned with, what we're doing in the other downtown area, even though the numbers aren't identical. So I think the headline for tonight is what Mr. Kami said earlier, which is parking demand will change. Not may change, might change, but it will change. And so that's going to be, frankly, a change for our community to get used to being more flexible, and perhaps we'll have to change these prices and the numbers more often than we have before, because we're no longer in a stable situation. I'm sorry, this isn't in any order. It's just in the order I've got things written down here. One of the things that we referenced paid parking earlier, and that is one of the AECOM actions in the memo that they're working on for the SCAP. So that is, I think, somewhere that we're going to need to end up if we're going to meet these goals that we have that are so large and so important. So I wanted to throw that out as part of how parking demand will change. Mr. Kami, last night when we were talking about an adjacent topic, you were talking about data. Talk to us a little bit about how data that we get if we make these changes will inform decisions. Hello. Oh, excellent.
She has to join in here.
Oh, we're so happy to have her back. She's grown a lot since the budget.
Yeah.
Well, I knew there was a staffing shortage down there, but that's pretty creative.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Oh, well, it's almost past my bedtime, but she looks like she's doing well. Okay,
She's about to
sorry.
have a bath. But no, just to tell you really quickly, because the data is really important to this. Hopefully she's going to let me talk. The data is really critical to this, because what we want to do is we want to really gauge our occupancy. And we're going to be able to do that through using our license plate recognition software, which is going to collect the number of parked cars and tell us what we typically do like once a year. And we go out there and we go for a couple of days. We have a company that goes out and counts how many cars are parked in a block, and it says, this is your occupancy on a given block. But we're going to be able to have that on a daily basis at several time points each day, every single weekday. And we're also going to be able to do that in garages. And we have, as an example, the new California Avenue garage, which is going to give us real-time data for parking. So we're going to know, to the minute what happens on a Monday in our parking garage. And we'll also be able to use the LPR technology to count spaces in the garage on a not quite as frequent basis, but we can count the cars. We can't check their permits.
All right, so two related follow-ups, and Mr. Baird can certainly answer if that makes it easier. One is, do we/you have enough staff to do this sort of analysis? I mean, are we staffed up for that? And the second would be how much that information can be made available to the public on an open source basis if they want to download something and do their own analysis.
Yeah, so the staffing plan is to build this reporting into kind of an automated type format via our parking management vendors. So we're trying to offload much of the data collection and then also the data reporting to be automated and to have our vendors supply it regularly. I think we need to do a little bit of formatting, a little bit more building out to make it public, but we entirely do intend upon making this data public. We just need to kind of work out the formatting and, any privacy type issues in terms of the units of analysis and, what types of, what numbers we're coalescing and publishing. But we will be figuring that out over the next few months.
Great.
Yeah, and that is our goal, is to have it be at the same time we're receiving the data, the public receives the data, so they can drill down and get the same kind of information that we get.
Wonderful. Those are all great answers. Happy to have them. Very excited to hear micro transit shuttle coming soon. Any time frame you want to give me and the public?
I turned off my camera instead of turning on my mic, sorry. Well, just noting that there's going to be an item coming fairly soon to council where we'll be seeking approval of the grant award. So that's the first step in our process, is we have to accept the grant that we've received. And then following that, we'll be doing a procurement process, which means we need to seek out and find a vendor. Hopefully the labor issues that you've all been hearing about, the labor shortages, and frankly, it's hitting transit pretty hard as well. Hopefully those don't impact our timeline. Our goal is to have service start before the next school year, so before fall of 2022.
Okay, so that's still a long ways away, but it sounds like we're making progress. I wanted to follow up on, I had the same question that Vice Mayor did on the TMA. How does the proposed reduced price employee parking permit interact with what the TMA is offering in terms of, transit passes and credits? Like, I just want to make sure that we're doing this in a thoughtful manner.
Yeah, well, it is all really synergistic. And so I really appreciate both of you bringing that up, because quite frankly, the TMA receives most of its funding from parking permit sales. So most of the funding that the TMA has operated off of since its existence has come from parking permit sales in the garages and lots. So it's very circular. So essentially, somebody parks in the garage, they are paying for the TMA to hopefully make an alternative mode trip.
Yeah, my question is more about the reduced price employee parking permit and how that price matches or doesn't match with basically the funding that the TMA would provide to a lower wage employee to not drive. Right? Because the TMA is always talking with us about how that's a big part of what they do.
So I think you're talking, Councilmember Cormack, about if they're going to subsidize or buy go passes for the lower wage workers, how does the total cost of that compare with the lower wage or the lower priced permit? And do they disincentivize the transit oriented TMA services? Okay.
Yeah, so I just want to say, first of all, I think the first plan is to make sure that we're not shutting out any of what we call, we don't call low income, we call reduced price permits. But just noting the reduced price permits, the idea is to not shut out anyone who's currently been buying reduced price permits. But I also want to note that the TMA has varying different programs in which, they have, for instance, they've just received donations of go passes that don't have a cost associated with them. They have a Waze carpool program that's for after hours. They also do carpooling. So they do set up carpooling and work to get parking permits as well. So they might actually be purchasing some of those, not purchasing, but providing help in purchasing and setting up carpools to purchase those lower income permits. So there's also synergy there. And frankly, also with the transit system, the micro transit system that we'll be setting up, there's synergy with that and the parking programs, because in theory, both of those things should be reducing parking demand.
Okay, so what I hear you saying is that it's all aligned. All right, great. Now let's talk a little bit about maps and things like that. Did you get any feedback on the change to the boundary maps for university? Is there any, you showed that map. Does anybody in the community have concerns about that you've heard?
This is a concern that was brought up numerous times by our residents in terms of being a disincentive to using the garages and lots. And so it's one of those ideas that we picked up, investigated, and thought that it would make sense to expand the eligibility and use of the garages and lots.
Great. Okay. And then the next thing, we were talking earlier about California Avenue and retail and a potential Inlue program. But, you know, I say this all the time, but for me, it's not just about businesses that generate sales tax like restaurants and retail. For me, it's also about the neighborhood serving businesses that don't generate sales tax. And so an example on California Avenue is dentists, right? Certainly we've heard from dentists and orthodontists there multiple times when we've adjusted parking permits. This was, I think, before your time, Mr. Kami. You know, so I personally would hesitate to make decisions about classes of people who might get, and of course, we can't give them preferential treatment, as we commented earlier, you know, with respect to Proposition 26, but I just want us to have a more expansive view of what contributes to the community. And I'll just say also, I think it's possible, I think it's actually frankly plausible that many of the people who come here to work, who are quote office workers, as referred to, are the ones that are patronizing those restaurants. You know, we certainly heard from many of the restaurants during, and particularly on Cal Ave, about how much of their business was based on people who came there from work, and certainly some component of people from Stanford. So wanted to throw those things out. Pleased to see on packet page 23, page 13 of this report that really this is about moving this whole program toward continued financial viability. And I'm really glad to see that, you know, we've got sort of a couple year time horizon to figure out, to sort of rebalance these, et cetera. That's what I had. Oh, you know what? One more question. All right. The difference between the formal parking in lieu program and the subscription in lieu program seems to be this more attainable level cost to be determined. Can we get one more sentence on the difference between the formal part and the subscription one? Just so I understand.
Well,
sure. So, well, for one, the formal part is a bit known to us in terms of process and how that would come together. The subscription one would need to be created. So there's a little bit of work and you know, talking with legal, and you know, there's a lot of things that we need to sort out. But the idea is with the formal in lieu program, you acquire the space, the virtual space, and
with your virtual parking permit.
Well, not the,
I'm
yeah,
joking. I'm joking. Go on.
Okay, thank you. So you acquire that virtual space, and it's yours, right? You have that sort of in you know, for different changes of land uses, even if you know, a lower use, you still sort of acquire that space, that intensification. The subscription is a little bit more flexible in that it's in concept, right? It's available to the property owner or the tenant when they want it and need it. But let's say the restaurant goes out of business and a retailer comes in there, the owner could, and let's say the owner was the one who had the subscription, they could opt out of that. And so there's a little bit more fluidity into how those spaces might be available to others down the road. So that restaurant comes out, another one comes in, and now there's a space available.
But is it fair to say that the main attraction is a lower number than the formal one?
It's the lower cost for sure.
Yeah.
Is sort of the impetus for it. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thanks. And then just yes, go
I
ahead.
have one more, I think, important point in terms of the formal, what we're calling the formal in lieu. If it were to be administered the way that the downtown in lieu is administered, that is the city collecting money and committing to spend every penny of those dollars on creation of new parking facilities in the future. So that would not be the case with what's being called the subscription in lieu program.
Right.
And then just to clarify, in neither of these does it entitle a property owner to a committed parking space in any public facility. Yeah.
It basically says we're going to allow you to purchase a virtual parking space, and we're going to let you go ahead and meet the zoning requirements for that using this space that is not your dedicated space. Right. Okay. And then, so I appreciate that we did California Avenue differently than, we did downtown, but that's water under the bridge. So we just have to figure out how to make it work now. And then finally, I just want to say, I think the whole move towards monthly permits has so many positive benefits. Whether it's seasonal workers in the summer or seasonal workers in, over the holiday season. I think that's a great move. So, all right, I'm going to wrap it up. Councilmember Phil Seth, you want to have another round?
No, I think this is going the right direction, and the Inlue thing is interesting. And so, I think from a pure theoretical sustainability perspective, I completely agree on the subject of the $112,000, right? And the devil in the detail is these things is how you decide who gets to participate in this versus who doesn't, and so forth, at least usually, right? But you're sort of doing a hand wave that says, we're going to solve some of that demand through other means like TMA and stuff, and shuttles and stuff like that, so it won't actually cost $112,000 per car, right? That we add as we get to a more intense usage. And so I think we got to sort of keep track of that and just understand that that's what we're talking about. But it's an idea worth looking further at, for sure.
Vice Mayor?
Yeah, just wanted to hit a couple other related things, principally on Cal Ave. So one is the need to really look at how we promote other modes of transportation rather than extremely expensive parking that contributes to traffic congestion and greenhouse gases. And the Cal Ave garage, the Cal Ave peak demand historically has been work days around the lunchtime at Shoulders. And so we built a really expensive garage to accommodate that peak demand. And that goes into one, going forward, we should be doing everything we can to encourage people to come to Cal Ave through other means. And part of that is simply making sure that once you get there, that bike travel or micromobility travel is facilitated, including the parking. And I saw this evening that we just got an email from Amy Ashton about bike parking at Trader Joe's, which I've often run into and is overflowed. And there are just a number of places in town where bike parking is overflowed. It's so inexpensive compared to car parking that we ought to make it really convenient, so people think that bike parking is door to door, whereas car parking, you gotta find your parking space and then walk from your parking spot. So I really think that we should do that relatively modest investment to expand the bike parking. And also in that same theme about peak hour, when we look at whatever the in lieu fees would be, we have different circumstances on whether an establishment will actually place demand on that peak time. And so I don't usually use actual examples, but this one leaps forward. I'm familiar that Mood's Wine Bar, that in the evening operates a wine bar out of Printer's Cafe, had wanted to create his own establishment a couple of doors away, and there was a former he couldn't do it because we didn't have an Inlue structure. But it occurred to me, in all likelihood, that his establishment would have a use permit that may not even be seeking to be open at those peak daytime hours. That's an evening business. And so should we have, if there is a business that has a use permit that restricts their use to not placing any demand where we actually have the constraint on parking, should that be a different fee structure? And so I just want to toss that out there for consideration. The other thing that we have on the horizon is Electrified Caltrain, when we'll get hopefully at least 2 stops per day at the CalAV station. And I think that will really help facilitate greater transit use there, including for the whole research park and the expansion Marguerite that will serve CalAV. So here's how that happens. Stanford has mentioned to me in the past that they were willing to and interested in expanding the Marguerite to the CalAV station once it got decent coverage. Right now, they have most of their pickups at the university station to serve the research park because that's when the trains are where they're going. And they would increase the Marguerite stops at CalAV and run a regular shuttle from CalAV up into the research park. Well, that goes both ways. That's also a lunchtime shuttle that we were seeking that would have taken a peak off of the need for the parking garage alone. Now we're 2 to 3 years out from that, but that time's going to fly. And within, by the time we're ramping back up to a more normalized economy, that should be right on the horizon. And let's build that into our considerations and be having those discussions with Stanford because I think they will be accommodating that. Lastly, well, 2 other things. One is the staff report at different times talked about reducing the parking in the Evergreen, but my understanding is right now looking to actually eliminate commercial permits in all but the G area. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it is a reduction in the overall.
I froze, it looks like.
Oh, are we?
No, I think we might have lost him as opposed to having you freeze. Let's
Okay,
give
well,
him
it
a
is
moment.
a reduction in the overall Evergreen Park Mayfield RPP employee permits, but we'd be eliminating those permits in zones A through F.
All right, let's see if, looks like he's dropped off. We'll see if he, coming back.
Am I back?
Yes, you're back. Welcome back.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. Did you hear Mr. Cammy's answer?
No, I didn't. I'm sorry.
No worries. Go ahead, Mr. Cammy.
Oh, yeah, I was just saying it will be a reduction in the overall Evergreen Park Mayfield RPP employee permits. However, we'd be eliminating all of the employee permits in zones A through F and retaining those in zone G.
Well, good. That was my understanding. And assuming that if we calculate in the impact of the street closure, we still have enough capacity to do that, then we wouldn't have demand for those permits anyway. With the pricing structure we have, who's going to walk 4 blocks for the same price as parking in the garage? But I do worry that do we set an expectation that that we won't ever have parking in those zones again? I think it's entirely reasonable that those neighborhoods get what we had committed, which is to try to ratchet down that amount of permits in the neighborhoods. But this basically goes to eliminating it. And we can do that now. I just don't want to set an expectation that we're going to have a big struggle with later. And essentially right now, they'd be phantom permits because we'd be saying they're authorized, but they're probably not going to get sold or used. But I just wanted to put out that consideration to make sure that we're looking at the impact of the street closure, and 2, that we're not setting an expectation that then creates a problem in the future. Sorry.
If I can, just really quickly, I think, and this is something that you'll likely hear from residents, but I think that there's been an expectation since the RPP programs were developed that there would be a transition of employee permits not parking on residential streets. And I also just kind of want to note that Palo Alto's rather unique in this situation. It's pretty uncommon for employees to receive residential parking permits. So again, I want to go back to what I said at the very beginning of this. I think this is going to be a year where we need to do some serious evaluation. Luckily, we're going to have the tools in place to be able to do that and really determine what is happening out there. Quite frankly, I don't think we can rely on the data that we had previously. And so I do believe we're setting up really good systems to have not just accurate data, but an immense amount of accurate data that can really help us to make really informed decisions in the future.
Well, that goes to my, when you say we have the tools, there's one other big tool that we haven't brought out of the tool chest, which is the reestablishment of a parking assessment district in the Cal Ave area. As I mentioned earlier, the two big downtown garages at Bryant and High that we built a number of years ago were fully funded by the assessment district, as were the former garages on Cal Ave. And then this last one, we said, no, we're going to pay for this out of city general funds, not have the businesses that frankly had a huge increase in property values from when we redid Cal Ave and the streetscape. Those property values shot up because it just made that whole district much more attractive district. Rents for a combination, I can tell you in that over a 9-year period, I saw my rent go from $2 a square foot to $5.50 or $6 a square foot in 9 years. And that was on an old aged property with no cost basis on a mortgage. And so it's just all incredible windfall profit. And then what do we do? Instead of having assessment district, it said, well, you've made all this money during all this boom, but you've created a parking problem that's overflowing into the neighborhood. So what we'll do is, out of general fund, we'll give you more money and pay for that parking problem. And that's basically what we did. And I think we've got to get back to having property owners bear responsibility for the parking demands that they generate and the trips they generate. Now how that assessment district would translate going forward when that we're a ways from having additional parking demand in that area because we built a garage with 300 plus extra spaces. We won't know for a few years, but I think that assessment district could also pay for the TMA, and that's the better way to reduce the parking demand. And that would be a far lower cost, I think, than probably paying into parking spaces. So I'd really encourage us to look at how to reestablish that. I don't know if Molly's had a chance to look at that further and has any comments.
No, that's not been on our radar as a to-do list. And I think that, that would be something that bears a lot further conversation at council as to whether you want us to do some preliminary work on that. It's a fairly complicated issue in terms of how the law has developed on the establishment of assessment districts. It's quite a few more procedures required now and benchmarks that have to be hit. Of course, there's an election required. So lots to do there in terms of kind of even laying out the basics. So we have not yet been working on that. And if that's something that the committee is interested in recommending that council ask us to do, then we could consider doing some work on that. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. I'm feeling like it's time for us to go ahead and move towards motions since we've done 2 rounds. So why don't I go ahead and move the staff recommendation in all of its multi-part glory. I think there are 4 parts here. And then with respect to the at places memo, which is not covered in the staff recommendation, is that right?
The very first
I think it's
recommendation is to, give us direction on.
Yeah.
We basically
Okay,
want you to digest the memos and.
Yeah. Okay, sorry. And this is a referral to the PTC. That's really what you're asking for. It doesn't come straight to council. Okay. Such as by establishing let me find the word that you were using. subscription Inlue program to promote, not to promote, to make possible, changes in use on California Avenue.
So I'm sorry, I'm not sure who's typing, but I think we want the word subscription in there. Just, yep.
And if I can just clarify for my own benefit here. So this is a recommendation going to the full council.
It says
okay,
to the
so then-
PTC, yeah. It would,
And so if
the
the
council
council-
would refer to the PTC.
okay, thank you.
Can I ask that it says measures to alleviate parking requirements on businesses?
Yeah, I was looking at that too. How about accommodate? Because you're not getting rid of the
Nice.
requirements. It's
Nice,
yeah.
yeah. Let's go ahead and change alleviate to accommodate. This is in A. It's in
Yeah.
the
I had
first
the
line
same
of A.
reaction you did, Pat.
I think that seems, does staff feel that that's wide enough for, yes, okay, great, I see a nod. So if there is looking for a second, and if there's not, we'll continue the discussion.
I'll second.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Speak briefly to it, and if we need to make some modifications, certainly let's do that tonight. This has been a long time coming. And I think we should just take a moment to acknowledge the very heartfelt compliments that our Office of Transportation received tonight. I think this was one of the main topics when I ran, and that was 3 years ago. It's taken a long time to get here, so I appreciate the thoughtfulness. Doesn't mean it isn't, perfect, and it sounds like there may be some changes we make going forward. Yeah, Councilmember Philseth.
Let's do it.
Okay, Vice Mayor Burt.
I'm good.
All right, let's go ahead and vote then. Vice Mayor Burt.
Yes.
I will vote yes, and Councilmember Philseth.
Yes.
That passes unanimously. I thank the staff, and I thank all the residents who have followed this closely and worked with our staff to get this where this is. And it sounds like it will change again because parking demand will change. All right, that brings us to future meetings and agendas. Ms. Nose?
Yes, thank you, Chair Cormack. So first things first, I would like to, if possible, have the committee members look at their calendars really quickly and see if November 30th is a date that they are available for a normal scheduled time at 6 p.m.
Ms. Nose checked in with me. I am available, and the Vice Mayor is nodding. Councilmember Philseth is checking. I might point out this would be in lieu of, sorry, bad pun.
Yeah.
In lieu of November 16th.
Yep.
You said that's November 30th?
Yes.
Yeah, so I asked
Yep.
this because staff would recommend that we cancel the November 16th meeting and move it to November 30th, which follows the Thanksgiving holiday. And this way we won't stack, just with the council's break, we'll have the November 30th and December 7th. And then December 7th would be our final Finance Committee meeting of this calendar year.
All right.
So
I'm good with that.
wonderful. So if the committee is okay with that, then our next meeting is on October 19th, I believe. I keep getting those messed up, which is the second Tuesday of this month, where we're expecting to talk about ballot measures. Part 2, before we get to the full council, which we're scheduled to do in November. And then we'll likely have one item on November 2nd as well. And then that brings us through the end of the year. So we will, a little bit crazy to think another calendar year has passed or nearly passed, but appreciate your flexibility on switching those 2 dates. And we will keep everything moving to reach the posting deadlines.
Great. All right. Thanks for that. Seeing nothing else, we are adjourned. Everyone have a nice evening.
Super.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.